Don't be fooled by the seemingly calm and cordial relations between the gaming heavyweights, because simmering just beneath this tranquil surface, there's a super serious console war raging on. And a few weeks ago, Sony launched a surprise shot across the bows of Microsoft, Nintendo, Google, and Neopets with the sudden news of their next generation hardware, and it's about to become all-out carnage. Okay, so the idea of a bitter console war is all a bit 90s, with everyone being slightly more grown up and civil about things now, except maybe PC gamers. But that's not to say this isn't huge news, with the confirmation that the PS5 not only exists, but also has been in production for a while. Featuring Hollywood stars such as ray tracing, AMD Ryzen, and Radeon Navi. The hardware details are looking very impressive for Sony's next-gen adventure, with early estimates of a 2020 release date to look forward to. So, to celebrate the imminent PlayStation 5, they haven't officially named it yet, but let's be honest, that's what it will be, we've prepped 5 unusual facts about PlayStation consoles, and then we got another 5 for you, because we're generous like that. I'm Peter from TripleJump, and these are 10 things you didn't know about PlayStation. Number 10. The first mascot. International Video Game Ethics, Article 37, every games console requires a suitably charming mascot to represent it. Nintendo had Mario, Sega had Sonic, Microsoft had the Red Ring of Death, but what about Sony? Well, in the cold dark days before Spyro and Crash, who could be better than the creepy Night King looking fella that is Polygon Man? Resembling a fever dream you might get after 10 straight hours of gaming and consuming a block of cheese before bedtime, Polygon Man was the rather ill-fated early mascot of the original PlayStation. The idea was that this fella would show off PlayStation's remarkable 3D graphics for the time, but according to former Sony executive Phil Harrison, before the PS1 was debuted at E3 1995, PlayStation's then global head, Ken Kutaragi, apparently went, quote, absolutely insane when he saw this abomination, and Polygon Man was, and this is another quote, taken out into the car park and quietly shot. Great image, Phil. Probably for the best, since you weren't likely to sleep for a week after gazing upon that sinister, jagged face. Still, at least Polygon Man had a comeback as the final boss in the PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale, and was voiced by David Hayter of Solid Snake fame, no less. So, all's well that ends well? No, he's still creepy. Number 9. A Nintendo add-on. So, here's a funny thing. In the early 90s, Nintendo wanted to get involved in the latest tech innovations. Some things never change, eh? So they approached audio-visual tech wizard Sony to help them create a CD-ROM add-on, seeing as their boss man Ken Kutaragi had already developed a sound chip for the SNES. Sony were up for it, but Tendo themselves ended up getting cold feet, unhappy with the contract after review since Sony stood to gain most of the publishing rights and profits. So, they went behind Sony's back to sign a better deal with Philips, and then announced this one day after Sony unveiled their offering. Now that's not very family-friendly of you, is it, Nintendo? And neither was it very smart, in hindsight, as Sony went on to develop their technology into 2 of the highest-selling home consoles in history, with the PS1 outdoing the N64 by 3-1, and the Philips CDI by... well, the Philips CDI was... I think some of them sold, didn't they? Or... Can someone check that? Number 8. Japan's PSX DVR. Not to be confused with the fact that the PlayStation 1 is sometimes referred to as a PSX, the PSX DVR launched in 2003 to Japanese audiences only, and was basically a PS2 with added sprinkles. Features included a digital disc recorder, software for editing video, images, and audio, along with the ability to link your PSP to transfer media. This thing had everything, although strangely it didn't actually ship with any controllers, which is really odd. The only problem with the product, of course, was its exorbitant cost of 80,000 yen, aka $960 or upwards of 700 Great British pounds. I can barely afford to even look at this thing. But in fairness, Sony has always had a very strange relationship with console price tags. In the early days, they were famous for undercutting competition. Sony's then head of development Steve Race infamously walked up to the microphone at E3 1999 1995 in the wake of the Sega Saturn's $399 price tag and simply said $299 before walking back to his seat. That's quite the mic drop. On the flip side though, there was the ridiculous $600 charge for the PlayStation 3 at launch, which cost the company $3.5 billion in the first 2 years after going over budget with research and development. Man, this business stuff is a bit tricky, isn't it? If only Sony had kept Steve Race around just to shout small numbers at gathering crowds. 3. Number 7. The controller symbols. These days, triangle, circle, square, and X, or cross if you want to get serious about this, are synonymous with the PlayStation's brand, but back when we first picked up a controller, these seemingly random shapes felt like bizarre ancient hieroglyphs compared to the A's and B's we were used to. But funnily enough, this choice was very deliberately made by designer Teyu Goto so that they'd be easier to remember than colours or letters. Furthermore, each symbol had its own meaning, intended to create a standardized control system across various commonly occurring video game mechanics. For decision making, the circle means yes and X means no, similar to commonly used Japanese symbols. The triangle, arrow-like so it is, corresponds to perspective, viewpoint, direction, and your own head, while square simply represents a sheet of paper for menus, notes, and inventories. Is the weird control scheme of Metal Gear Solid starting to make any more sense to you now? Of course, this wasn't to last, and though some designers did stick to the conventions for a time, things quickly descended into a control scheme free-for-all, mostly thanks to meddling Westerners. Nowadays, X invariably means yes, for example, but I don't know, we think standardized symbols is actually quite a good idea, so much so that we're about to file our own patented TripleJump controller setup. It's simple, really. You press Walrus for yes, the Penguin button for any scandalous decisions, and the 3 button for jumping 3 times. Just ignore the 2 button, we're not allowed to touch that. Number 6, share your souls. Dark Souls. You like it. Ben likes it. I've heard of it, and Sony Worldwide Studios president Shuhei Yoshida ruddy loves it apparently, so much so that we might owe From Software a lot of thanks for being something of a driving force behind one of the PS4's best features. Yoshida revealed in a PlayStation blog podcast in 2013 that the PS4's sharing, streaming, and messaging capabilities owe heavily to his love for watching Dark Souls clips on YouTube. Lots of things Demon's Souls and Dark Souls did inspired us when designing the system features for the PS4, he said. In reference to the console sharing technology, he went on to state, "I enjoy so much watching people playing Dark Souls on YouTube. This game is perfect to learn from other players how to attack the same situations with very different strategy." One thing I do know about Dark Souls is the messaging system that allows you to leave some simple phrases behind for other players to find. And though Yoshida also touches on this in his post, perhaps it's better that the PS4 DM system is not merely made up of a lexicon designed to warn people about dangers ahead, convince them to jump down bottomless pits, and churn out some rather inventive sexual innuendo. Number 5, homebrew development. If you ask enough grandmas what PC stands for, sooner or later one of them will say PlayStation Computer. But you know, that phrase is less a portmanteau than you might think. This is a PS2, and oh boy, it's a clever little sausage. Not only can you play all your favourite video games on it, including your PS1 back catalogue, but once upon a time you could also effectively turn it into a PC. If you knew what the hell you were doing, in Linux, that is. Yes, you might not be aware that Sony released the PS2 installation kit to the public in 2002, enabling users to turn their console into a software development station and make their own games from open source code. All you really had to do was read up on how to use one of the frequently used programming languages of the time, like Matrix++ or Mega City Basic or Java Beans. Nowadays, it seems a surprisingly open approach, considering the amount of anti-tampering and piracy countermeasures that protect modern consoles, and it's not even the first time Sony helped out the indie scene either, with a special 1997 PS1 dev kit called Net Eurose also helping young game makers to get a taste for the craft, some of whom went on to produce actual Sony-published video games many years later. Pretty good investment, really. Number 4, the US Air Force's PS3 supercomputer. That's quite the entry name. Back in late 2000, a story was circulating on one or more of the internets that Saddam Hussein had procured thousands upon thousands of PS2s and was planning to bolt them together to give him that real cutting-edge 128-bit dictatorship experience, I guess. Now this story probably isn't true, but let's turn our gaze to the PS3. While Sony's 7th generation console took some stick for being difficult to develop on due to its unusual system architecture, it doesn't make the hardware's technical prowess any less impressive. This was perhaps best demonstrated by the US Air Force, who purchased 1,760 PS3 consoles in 2010 and pooled their resources to produce the Condor cluster, which was once the 33rd most powerful supercomputer in the world, and at the time, the fastest computer in the whole US Defense Department. The console's unique Cell microprocessor made for some seriously heavyweight processing power, ideal for cluster computing, i.e. networking many computers together to complete complex tasks like radar enhancement, satellite imagery processing, and pattern recognition. Ironically, the US Defense Department did this because the PS3, a console deemed too expensive on launch, was actually cheaper than the equivalent system the military would have made with off-the-shelf parts. Scientists at the University of Alabama also used PS3 clusters to measure and study the properties of black holes. Not sure how that one turned out, although since we recently got a photo of a black hole, maybe we can just see... Oh, hang on, zoom and enhance. My god, there it is! Number 3, hidden demo discs? Game cases can feel disappointingly empty these days. Once they carried a cornucopia of goodies relating to the purchased game, such as in-depth maps, instruction manuals, stickers, posters, life-size clone of Leon Kennedy who'd cook you dinner and then sing you to sleep, and back in the early PlayStation 1 era, you were occasionally gifted demo discs too. You do remember demo discs, right? I'm not really sure what our viewers' average age is, to be honest. They were basically early access, except you didn't have to pay for it, and when the games were finally published, they weren't still littered with bugs. But what may come as a surprise to you is that some sneaky devils allegedly decided to hide theirs in a special compartment in the back of the case. Details are thin on the ground for this one, but some forum posters have mentioned these discoveries in Ridge Racer Type 4, Tekken 2, Need for Speed 2, and several others. Many people claim to have found them in the standard jewel cases we all remember, while others say they unearthed theirs in boxes of the chunkier VHS size. I have to say though, exciting mysteries aside, it's not particularly smart for game developers to hide their promotional material away like this. Either way, imagine finding one of these as a kid, or better yet, unearthing a completely untouched one today after a second-hand purchase. Gaming treasure doesn't get much better than this. Number 2, the 2002 memory card shortage. We really don't know how good we've got it nowadays. Worrying about save game data is barely a concern in an era of internal hard drives, but in ye olden days of the PlayStation 1 and 2, you couldn't save any of your progress without a nifty little 8MB memory card. So, during the great memory card drought of 2002, things looked pretty bleak. The shortage was caused in part by the console's own success. An insatiable demand for PS2s had already led to a scarcity of the consoles themselves after their launch in 2000, and famine lightning was to strike twice, as rising popularity also meant a greater need for memory cards, often more than one per console. This, combined with Sony's decision to cut ties with licensed third-party manufacturers like Mad Catz, meant thousands of gamers in the US quite literally ran out of memory. The whole thing is, quite frankly, terrifying. Your only option would have been to leave your console running for days on end, or else have to play the same Final Fantasy X Blitzball or Silent Hill 2 opening spookums over and over again. No thanks. I'll get one on the black market if I have to. And number 1, Ken Kutaragi hated Crash Bandicoot. Yay! Ah yes, Mr. Bandicoot, the madcap marsupial that defined a generation of PlayStation greats, became the unofficial non-creepy mascot of the console, and was loved by all. Except the actual father of PlayStation, Ken Kutaragi. Oh no! The boss man was reportedly not too happy about the poor furry fellow, feeling that the wacky cartoonish features were at odds with his vision of creating a more mature console offering for teens and adults. He believed, and perhaps rightly so, that having a brightly coloured anthropomorphic platform hopper for a mascot wouldn't provide enough differentiation from the kid-friendly, gotta-go-fast competition. He even confronted Naughty Dog about Crash Bandicoot, calling the game crap, that's literally the word he used, and launching into a list of reasons why he didn't like it. But what's the real reason? Hey Ken, you didn't like Polygon Man for not being kid-friendly enough, and you don't like Crash for being too kiddie. What have you got against video game mascots, Ken? Who did this to you, Ken? This is about Nintendo's cruel betrayal, isn't it, Ken? Do you have nightmares, Ken, about coming home from work and finding your wife, Mario, in bed with a nondescript Philips CDI mascot, only for you to pack up all his stuff into black bin liners and throw it out the window and say, I'm never having you back, my mum warned me about you? It'd certainly explain all these US ads anyway.
Mustache Man, your worst nightmare has arrived.
Thankfully, despite Ken's objections, Crash did make it onto shelves, free to smash up boxes, ride some pig boys, and whump his way through far more than 5 a day. Thank the Lord for this iconic unofficial mascot, perfectly suited for an equally iconic console. And there we are, all up to speed on PlayStation trivia, so on the off chance the new console ships with a mandatory quiz to weed out the casuals, just come back and watch this video and you're sure to ace it. Don't forget to mention any other interesting PlayStation factoids in the comments below as well. You can follow myself and TripleJump on Twitter here, and if you want to support the things you enjoy, then why not check out the rewards on our Patreon. Finally, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. I've been Peter from TripleJump, and thanks for watching.